My guest today is Nick Pope. You've all seen Nick. He's on all those Ancient Aliens and the Basement Office and UFOs, declassified shows, and pretty much any documentary you've ever seen on UFOs and many on conspiracies. You've seen Nick Pope. Nick is an author, journalist, and TV personality who ran the British government's UFO program for the Ministry of Defense for 21 years, leading the media to call him the real Fox Mulder. Although Mulder was pretty much a believer, and as you'll see in this conversation, Nick is pretty much in the skeptical camp on most of these things. Nick Pope is recognized as one of the world's leading experts on UFOs, the unexplained, and conspiracy theories. He's the media's go-to person for UFOs, and he's made appearances on numerous TV shows and documentaries, including Good Morning America, Nightline, Tucker Carlson Tonight, and Ancient Aliens. He's also written for the New York Times, for the BBC News website, and for NBC's technology and science site, and has acted as consultant and spokesperson on numerous alien-themed movies, TV shows, and video games. He gives talks and takes part in academic conferences, fan conventions, and debates all around the world. He's spoken at the National Press Club, the Royal Albert Hall, the Science Museum, and the Global Competitiveness Forum, and has debated at the Oxford Union and the Cambridge Union Society. He lives in the United States, here in California, actually. So this is a wide-ranging conversation. Obviously, we deal with the recent flap over UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, formerly known as UFOs, those Navy video clips that we've all seen. So we deconstruct those. We get into the larger issue of ufology, and then the even still larger issue of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligences. Are they out there, and have they come here, as two separate questions, and how to think about those questions. And so we go through pretty much everything you've heard about that particular subject. Then we transition into conspiracy theories, which is behind much of that, and then how to think about conspiracy theories, why so many conspiracy theories turn out to be true, which is one of the reasons why people naturally gravitate toward believing many of them, and how that turns out to be a signal detection problem, which ones are real and which ones are not. And then from there, we wrap it up talking about the kind of larger cultural issues. And in there, we also talk about the religious aspects of believing in UFOs, what I call deities for atheists and sky gods for skeptics. Nick is an atheist, as you'll hear, and how that does seem to fulfill some kind of deeper need in the human condition for believing that there's something else out there, bigger than us, smarter than us, more moral than us, and so forth, and that knows we're here. And that's part of the impulse driving it, although it's not his personal motive. He would actually like there to be aliens had come here, which I would too. It would be super interesting, but the question is it actually true, not just what we would like to believe? Anyway, enjoy this conversation, and if you appreciate the podcast, do give us some support at skeptic.com/donate. That goes to the Skeptic Society, which is a 501c3, so your donations are tax deductible, and it supports not only the podcast, but also Skeptic Magazine and all our other activities. All right, thanks for listening. Here's my conversation with Nick Pope. All right, Nick Pope, nice to see you, man. It's so good to have you on the show. I'm a long time fan and viewer of your many media appearances on this topic of UFOs and UAPs and conspiracy theories and so on. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's good to be on the show.
So Nick, let's just kind of do a general background for those of a few people of my followers here who are not familiar with your work. You're most famous for having worked for the Ministry of Defense. I guess that'd be the equivalent of the Department of Defense in the United States when you were living in the UK, and you were in charge of UFOs. So give us, actually, let's go back even further a little bit than that. Then give us a little potted biography of where you were born and raised and how you got interested in this particular topic, and how did you end up at the Ministry of Defense?
Well, I was born in the United Kingdom, and my father was a senior government scientist. He headed up the Royal Aeronautical Establishment at Farnborough, and then got promoted, rose to be Deputy Chief Scientific Advisor at the Ministry of Defense. So the MOD was sort of the family firm, and I got a tap on the shoulder from my own father, suggesting that it would be, interesting and important work to do that. I gladly complied. What father wouldn't want to follow his what son wouldn't want to follow his father into the glamour of that kind of work? Now, I was never a scientist, so I joined really as a bureaucrat, and most of my 21 years in the Ministry of Defense, I was a civilian employee. Most of my postings involved briefing, analysis, taking large amounts of data and distilling it down to fairly simple briefs for senior defense ministers, service chiefs, whoever it might be. And I did about 8 different postings over the course of my career. But the one that I guess we're going to focus on and that I'm best known for is one I had in the early 90s when I was posted to a division rather unglamorously titled Secretariat Air Staff. And my duties there included researching and investigating the UFO phenomena, or UAP as we generally called it. And the brief was essentially to see if there was evidence of any threat to the defence of the UK or anything of more general defence interest.
Right. So they're not looking for extraterrestrials. This isn't like a branch of the SETI program. This is defense of the realm. We have some sightings, we have reports, we have radar blips, we have whatever, and we don't know what they are. So go figure it out, because if it's, Russian drones or whatever, we need to know what that is.
Exactly. This was a defense and national security issue. It had its roots, and somebody who'd been doing the job that I did. I mean, way back, the post went back to at least 1953 on a formal basis, but we had reports before that on an ad hoc basis. And yeah, we were not conclusion-led at all. It was simply, if there's something in our airspace, we need to know what it is. And yes, absolutely, the default position was, and I know this is a kind of glib soundbite that I have given over the years, but it's true. It's more likely Russian than Martian. Not that we entirely dismissed those other possibilities, but yeah, we just went in thinking we need to find out who's in our airspace.
Yes, I love that little line from you. It's more likely Russian than Martian, because it's in a Bayesian way, and we can get into this a little later. It's like the line to medical students: if you hear footsteps or hoof steps outside of your door, and you live in North America, say, think horse, not zebra, because zebras are pretty much non-existent in North America except for zoos. So, it's a base rate probability estimation, and that makes sense. It's far more likely to be Russian, or in this case now Chinese with the UAPs, than say extraterrestrial. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And much of the time when I listen to you or read you, I think this guy's a skeptic like me. And then other times on some of these other shows, I think, I don't know. The way he says it is, in a way, it suggests it could be extraterrestrial. And I think there's a reason people have you on all these shows, is because you haven't come out and said, I'm pretty certain it's not aliens. And you phrase your lines in such a way that it kind of leaves it open, like it could be. And that opens the door for ufologists who already believe that, well, this guy worked for the Department of Defense. He's got good cred, and he says it's possible. So let's lean on him. So just what do you think? What do you believe or not believe, or how do you think about that?
Well, I try not to be too definitive in my beliefs. And you've probably seen me on shows where I come across as quite skeptical, and others where I am more open. And sometimes, to be fair, that is just the edit. But other times it is because my own views sometimes evolve and change. And I'm not going to sort of butter you up here by sort of saying, look, I'm absolutely in your camp on this. I'm a skeptic too. I do approach things from the point of view that, as I say, statistically, it is more likely to be Russian than Martian, but neither do I rule out the more exotic possibilities, because to take your horse zebra analogy, every now and then some exotic animal will break out of a private collection or a state or national zoo, and there really will be a zebra in somebody's backyard. So it's, yes, I mean, I know you know far more about statistics than I, but I'm just saying I never say never. And I want to actually circle back to one other aspect of government mindset that I think speaks to this question. And it's the concept of low probability, high impact. And we often thought in those terms, not just on UFOs, but on a range of things. And the idea that even if something has a vanishingly small probability, as long as it's not zero probability, we sometimes looked at those things because the consequences, if just one of those things turned out to be something low probability, would be so immense that it's worth taking a look. So I know that's a very long-winded way of saying, but I guess my default position on this is I do not rule out some of the more exotic possibilities, like extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
But neither
that's perfectly
have
stated,
I.
Actually,
I'm not. Neither am I going to make the case that there is definitive proof for this, because clearly there isn't.
Of course, right? Good, perfectly stated. Yeah, I think as scientists, we always have to keep an open mind because we don't know everything. There's a lot we don't know. When I made that, you and I are both on that Galileo project team led by Avi Loeb at Harvard. And, I gave that little presentation on Bayesian reasoning about UAPs. And one of the responses was interesting that, had we kind of taken that approach that I had just presented pretty far, then we never would have recognized, I think it was a type 2A supernovas, because that wasn't even in the bin of possibilities when we're looking at stellar objects. So you can't ever say never because then you're going to miss something, right? So you want to be open-minded enough to recognize something new, just in case, but not so open-minded that you believe everything that comes along, or that your brains fall out, as they say. So I think that's right. I think that's a good way to look at it. Just out of curiosity, when you were growing up, were you interested in science fiction? Did you have a fascination with the possibility of extraterrestrials? I mean, I did, and a lot of people interested in this subject did.
I guess I read quite widely as a kid, and certainly I did come across some sci-fi. I mean, War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. Yes, I read maybe I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 10. But I probably read all sorts of other things too. I mean, from classics through the whole range. But then I suppose when I was a teenager, I found the works of Asimov and very much enjoyed that. And then the Frank Herbert Dune books. So I enjoyed and read sci-fi. But I could probably say there were other genres that I enjoyed too, like thrillers.
Well, I guess what I'm after is there a personal interest in this? I mean, I'm fascinated by the whole UFO, UAP issue because even though I'm skeptical that they've come here, I separate two questions. Are they out there and have they come here? I think it would be shocking if there was no other intelligent life anywhere in the cosmos, given that just the raw numbers, 100 billion stars in every galaxy, 100 billion galaxies, maybe more than that, maybe a trillion galaxies. Whatever it is, the number is so huge that it would be stunning if, even no matter how many steps you have to go through in the Drake equation to get to a communicating intelligent life form, it's got to be close to one because of the raw numbers are so high. And so that's one aspect of the question. And then the other one is, have they come here, which is a different question entirely, I think. How do you separate those or think about those?
Yes, I do think they are two distinct questions that people often blur into one. I guess you get down to a debate, and this goes back to sci-fi, about whether light speed is a hard barrier or whether there are workarounds like warp drive and wormholes and such like, or But I've recently taken a different view on that, and I've said even if light speed turns out to be an insurmountable hard barrier, it still doesn't actually preclude interstellar travel. It just puts a very different time scale on it. But one of my favorite quotes, I think, from former NASA historian Stephen Dick, if we are living in a largely post-biological universe populated by immortal thinking machines, then pointing, I suppose, even if you suppose we could go no faster than we've already gone, and we had pointed a Voyager probe at Proxima Centauri, and it would take about 75,000 years to get there, to immortal thinking machines, to AI, doesn't matter. And in those sorts of, with the kind of cosmological timescales, even with light as a hard barrier, I don't think we should necessarily preclude the idea of them getting here from there if they are machine intelligence.
Right. So if we did encounter aliens here, they're probably going to be AI, some sort of information system, whatever we would consider to be something like a computer, not biological.
Yes, I think that so far from everything we know about our own sort of infant baby step space program is that space travel for biologicals is going to be very, very difficult. But maybe, for the probes, maybe a whole bunch of the problems, physiological, psychological, can be taken out of the equation.
Yeah, but let's leave the light speed as the upper limit. But I recall there are calculations where if you accelerate like 1g per whatever time, unit of time very slowly, so that you could sit there in the spacecraft and feel like you were just being pressed against the floor like we are right now with 1g. But you accelerate at 1g at each unit of time, you get up to like 99% of the speed of light within some relatively short period of time, like a year or two or something. And therefore, you could get to Alpha Centauri within, maybe 10 years or something, not 70,000 years. And I think it was like an ion propulsion engine proposed that could do this, something like that. So, and given that, the galaxy is, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and the galaxy's roughly double that, I guess. That's plenty of time for machine intelligence or even biological intelligence to get around the galaxy. They could have come here in some distant past, more likely in the distant past than now, just because of the Copernican principle that we're not special and our time is not special. There's no reason why that they should come, in the 1950s, say, rather than say 5,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. As ever, I think you almost get into philosophy when you start discussing these things. But I was there was a paper I think published earlier. I late last year maybe. I can't remember the exact title of it, but the kind of colloquial concept is grabby aliens. And anyway, it's quite an intriguing paper. It attempts to maybe blend a little bit of Fermi paradox with some other things, and it suggests that we might be a very early civilization. And it says you can argue yourself around in circles with this, but it says one of the reasons for that is that if we weren't, there would already be very visible technological structures out there. I guess the counter argument is that we're only just getting to the point where we're maybe able to detect them with things like James Webb, perhaps, if it all goes to plan, and square kilometer array when they get round to building it, and all these fabulous things.
Right, and the Galileo project cameras are going to be put all over the planet. We'll see what gets photographed in all those airspace. So again, but the probability that aliens are going to be anything like us has got to be extremely low, which is why I'm skeptical of like alien abduction stories, because it's always these kind of bipedal primates with a big brain and eyes and ears. And, how many species on Earth of the roughly 10 billion species there's ever been, look anything like that? Well, there's just, one lineage, the primates, and there's only a handful of those. And so the chances of that entire sequence evolving on some other planet is next to nothing, which is why Sagan never wanted to show what the aliens look like in Contact, because whatever we show in a Hollywood movie is going to be too parochial. It's going to be based on the the wardrobe availability in the costuming that they have to dress up people as aliens or whatever. They're not going to be anything like us. I mean, it could be something like an octopus or whatever. And so again, just using a probability type argument, even if they got here, they can't look anything like us.
Well, unless you say that there might be some sort of, convergent evolution kind of concept on a galactic scale that certain designs are maybe quite good in terms of the sorts of life that would be capable of going on to develop a technological civilization. And if a principle like that applies, then maybe we would get something like us. But I don't know. I suppose it's unknowable, but fascinating to think about. But again,
that's the argument
with the numbers, though.
Richard Dawkins made that very argument against me. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, with the numbers, though, that you mentioned, and I mean, I think I saw a paper a year or two ago suggesting a very low ball figure for the Drake equation, much lower than other more recent estimates, and I think it was something like 36 communicable civilizations in our galaxy. But going back to the number of galaxies in the universe, that's still calculated out to something like 72 trillion species out there. So I don't know. Maybe humaniform life will crop up here and there, in amongst other weirdness.
Yeah, that's the argument Dawkins made. That this convergent evolution argument that there's only so many ways to build a body. If you're in the water, you have to have something like a fusiform body, whether you're a mammal or a fish. That is, you have to have this kind of streamlined body that pushes through a dense medium. If you're on the air, live in the air, you got to have something like wings, whether you're a bat or a bird or an insect. And so this convergent evolution, maybe if you're living on the ground, you need to have some kind of arms and legs to propel yourself, and you need to have like most of the sensory apparatus up front in the head, and the waste disposal part at the back, and so on. And pretty soon you end up with something like a bipedal dinosaur. There's actually proposals that had the dinosaurs not gone extinct, they may have evolved into these kind of bipedal reptiles with big brains. And so something like that is not inconceivable.
No, I like to think so. And given the size of the universe, I suspect we'll find a vast diversity. And I mean, I mentioned largely post-biological, but I suspect we'll find biological, post-biological, and a huge range of size and shapes and colors and just diversity. I suspect it will be a diverse cosmos. Is a diverse cosmos.
Yes. I like the Fermi paradox just as a way of thinking about, how these things could be discovered. On the one hand, if the Copernican principle is true, we're in the middle of the bell curve. Therefore, there's many behind us and many ahead of us. So Fermi's paradox, they should have been here by now, because if you just take 1 billion years of time, that's plenty of time to populate the galaxy. Even if there's only 36 in the entire galaxy, that's, if you give them 1 billion years to develop technology and, build self-replicating robots that can go and land on planets and build more self-replicating robots and launch them into the cosmos. And then pretty soon, they should be everywhere, but they're not. So where are they? So one answer for me, I'd like to get your answer to the Fermi paradox, is there's just a lot of empty space, and it would be hard to find us. No matter how many there are, they're going to mostly miss most of the planets. but who knows?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm going to have to reread this recent paper on the so-called loud or grabby aliens, which suggested, that we might not be in the middle, that we might really be one of the first up. But yeah, I mean, I suspect there is a point though where even given the empty space, a civilization, certainly a spacefaring civilization, would leave fingerprints that would be detectable. I mean, people talk about the James Webb having the in infrared, but having this great analogy that they always roll out, that it would be able to detect a bumblebee on the moon. And then the Square Kilometre Array radio telescope, they have a similar analogy for that, and it's something along the lines of it would be able to detect an average airport radar system out to 50 light years. So I think, given those sorts of tools that we're just now getting into our hands, it is conceivable that a civilization, a few hundred or thousand years ahead of us, which isn't much in cosmic timescales, would be detectable. So I don't know. We hear a lot now, NASA getting into the search for techno-signatures, and Avi Loeb and Galileo project too, of course. Some of the things that they're looking for, a second Oumuamua or a third or fourth. Satellites may be in orbit around, the idea that things would be detectable and there would be fingerprints to be found. And I'm rather attracted to that. I mean, we heard a year or so ago about the Tabby star controversy, and I know there are much more prosaic explanations which are now favoured about that. But I think the principle remains the same. If there are things like alien megastructures, Dyson spheres, and things, we are not far off, particularly if they're in our local part of the Milky Way galaxy. We're probably not far off being able to detect them. And I guess it is the same the other way around, that we have probably been detectable to a civilization not much more advanced than our own level for some while, if they're out there.
I remember, I think in the 60s, Sagan proposed that maybe Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, might have been an artificial structure. He got hammered pretty hard for that. And, of course, it's not. But in principle, that could be Dyson sphere, Tabby star. For those not familiar with that, this was a star in which the light curve was much greater than it should have been based on the number of planets around it or what could possibly be blocking it, whether it was a cluster of comets or meteorites or moons or planets or whatever. It seemed like there was something more. So maybe these are like gigantic solar structures blocking the light between that star and us, something like that. I remember when that story first broke. This will get to the psychology of people who believe. That I was on this radio show. John I forget the name of it. One of these LA radio afternoon talk shows. John and Jillian, and so they had me on. They had on Art Bell, the other guy, George Newry, who was talking about Tabby star, and that he's pretty confident this is the aliens are there, and it's 1,500 light years away, and so and then they bring me on, and immediately Jillian asks, well, what are they like? And I said, what is who like? The aliens. It's like, there's no aliens. It's just a dip in the light cone, just a dip in the light curve. That's all we have is a dip in the light curve. There's no detection of aliens or anything like that. And it's 1,500 light years away. So it would that light took us 1,500 years to get here. And if we sent a signal saying, who's out there, it would take 3,000 years for the signal to get there and back if they responded right away. Anyway, but see, people immediately go to the, if mystery, then magic, or if mystery, then aliens. And so talk a little bit about that. The human psychology seems to be that even if you can explain 95% of all the sightings, which seems to be the number most even believers agree, that we're talking about that 5%, people readily just spin that 5% into fantastic stories and whole new worldviews, new physics. The aliens are here and they know we're here and they're this and that, based on this tiny little fraction of the unexplained.
Well, I think on the psychology, few people said it better than the X-Files with the "I want to believe," and I think people do want to believe. I want to believe. I make no bones about it. I often say, the world would be a much more interesting place with aliens in it than without. And as I said earlier, I have no definitive proof that they are here, but I certainly hope that we're being visited, and I certainly hope and believe that there's life out there in the cosmos, and that we'll find it sooner rather than later, probably with science. But going back to the question, yeah, I think there is. People love mysteries. People love the idea that there might be something more, something bigger than themselves, something that, I don't know, gives meaning. And I know where this is kind of going, obviously, because you will doubtless say, and others will be thinking, well, isn't this just another religion in a sense, another sort of quest for something over and above ourselves and our everyday existence? And I get that. I come at this, actually, maybe we can get into this. I don't normally talk about this, and it surprises some people. I'm actually an atheist, and which always creates some interesting dynamics at UFO conferences, particularly the more sort of spiritual New Age ones. So I don't know. But I can separate out those parts of my life, I think. I'm an atheist because I'm not sure I can even put it into words, really, but it's just not something that I have ever believed. Whereas, I think what you said earlier about the size of the universe, and you didn't quite put it this way, but I often do. But with the laws of physics and chemistry seeming to be constant in the observable universe, there's no reason to suppose that there's anything magical about life. So in one way, maybe it sounds like, that why is he an atheist if he believes in aliens? Actually, maybe it is understandable, this idea that I'm not arguing for any special treatment. I'm not arguing for a new physics. I'm arguing for, maybe with the extraterrestrial thing, and particularly visitation, maybe there being aspects to the laws of physics that we don't currently understand, but that's always been the way.
Yeah, I'm actually not surprised to hear you say you're an atheist. I didn't know that, but that doesn't surprise me at all. In a way, it makes sense, because I think of UFOs, or just the search for extraterrestrial intelligence in general, as a kind of deities for atheists, sky gods for skeptics. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way, like, oh, that belief is, it's like a religion, it's like a cult, it's like a myth, it's just a bunch of bullshit. I don't mean it that way. I think there's kind of a longing in the human heart or mind or condition about awe and wonder, and that there must be something out there bigger than us that knows we're here, or that, created things, or it's just something else out there. And I think that longing is in everyone. I think it is the basis of religion. And if you don't have religion, then what? Well, the scientific view of this would be there are aliens out there. And if there are, if we detected them, the chances of them being at our level is pretty nil. And if we detect them, they're likely to be ahead of us, not behind us, unless we go to some planet. And so if you take something like Moore's law development and apply not just to technology, the doubling of technology every 12 to 18 months or whatever, and you apply it to moral values and the development of human societies and so on, they are likely to be just vastly more superior to us, advanced than us, not just technologically, but morally, culturally, politically, economically, maybe like a post-scarcity Star Trek where they don't have money. They just have replicators that give you everything you want and everybody has equal rights. And at some point, you end up with this idea of this thing out there that is relatively omniscient to us. It just knows vastly more than we know. And it would seem like a godlike figure. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, again, to repeat myself. It just seems like that's a natural way to think about those things, a very human way to think about that.
Yes. I mean, I think picking up on a number of points there, I mean, I think people have speculated about literally almost like a god gene that causes us humans to believe in things like that. But yes, then, I mean, if essentially your last point was really, I guess, something that Arthur C. Clarke spoke to in that marvelous quote, which I'm probably going to mangle, but any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And extrapolating from that, any sufficiently advanced civilization would probably be indistinguishable from what we would call a god. I mean, I don't know if there is an upper limit on technology, for example, but if there is or isn't, there's certainly a level which must be something so above and beyond us that it would appear omnipotent to us, and that would that would certainly be interesting to encounter.
Yeah, like the analogies, if you gave an iPhone to a Neanderthal, he would think you're a god, or that the iPhone's the god. And I took Arthur C. Clarke's third law, which you stated perfectly, and applied it. In one of my Scientific American columns, I called it Shermer's last law, because you can't name laws after yourself, which is any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, or I added later, far future human, would be indistinguishable from God. Just because of the, kind of Moore's law, geometric growth or exponential growth of technologies and societies and so on. That idea is not original to me, but I think it's worth pursuing in that sense. And let me just read to you this. So I've done some research on this. This was one of my columns in Scientific American that I then expanded into this article for Skeptic. In a 2017 article in the journal Motivation and Emotion titled "We Are Not Alone," the psychologist Clay Routledge and his colleagues found an inverse relationship between religiosity and ETI beliefs. That is, those who report low levels of religious belief, but a high desire for meaning, show greater belief in extraterrestrial intelligences. In study 1, subjects who read an essay arguing that human life is ultimately meaningless and cosmically insignificant were statistically significantly more likely to believe in ETIs than those who read an essay on the limitations of computers. That was the neutral one. In study 2, subjects who self-identified as either atheist or agnostic were statistically significantly more likely to report believing in ETIs than those who reported being religious, primarily Christian. In studies 3 and 4, subjects completed a religiosity scale, a meaning in life scale, a well-being scale, and an ETI belief scale, and a religious supernatural belief scale. Quote, lower presence of meaning and higher search for meaning were associated with greater belief in ETIs, the researchers reported. But ETI beliefs showed no correlation with supernatural beliefs or well-being beliefs. From these studies, the authors conclude, quote, ETI beliefs serve an existential function, the promotion of perceived meaning in life. In this way, we view belief in ETI as serving a function similar to religion without relying on traditional religious doctrines that some people have deliberately rejected. And by this, they mean the supernatural. Continuing the quote, that is, accepting ETI beliefs does not require one to believe in supernatural forces or agents that are incompatible with a scientific understanding of the world. And then I conclude, if you don't believe in God but seek deeper meaning outside of our world, the thought that we're not alone in the universe could make humans feel like they are part of a larger and more meaningful cosmic drama. I think that gets to your point.
Yes, and I mean, I think it reinforces the point I was making earlier that unlike a god, extraterrestrial intelligence in some way really doesn't violate any sort of fundamental laws, and the idea that I mean, people sometimes joke about the UFOs, the UFO books being in the paranormal section in a library, and people say, well, what's paranormal about another civilization doing what we're doing, just on a slightly more advanced scale,
right.
but not, going back to our discussion about light speed, not necessarily offending against any of the laws of physics as we currently understand them. And I once had a great conversation about this with a British UFO researcher called John Spencer, and I remember he had a very great line on this. I said, well, if the UFO books weren't in the paranormal section, where would you put them? And he said, transport.
That's really funny. Right. Vehicles. Yeah, you're right. No, it's not supernatural. There's nothing supernatural about it at all.
But neither.
Although, then what do you do with the idea of? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say neither do I necessarily take the view that somehow atheists are searching for a meaning that religious people don't have. I think, I mean, in my experience, atheists find joy and pleasure in every aspect of life, and don't sort of think about it in terms of an afterlife. But whether it's a great record on the radio or a desert hike or whatever it is, it's enjoy the moment. As an atheist, I don't feel, and I just wanted to clarify this, I don't want people to think because I don't have God in my life, I'm looking for aliens. Because although I can make the analogy that some people might look for something, I don't define atheism as a sort of empty space that I'm looking to fill with something else, because I enjoy my life and I live every day and enjoy every day and don't feel this search for meaning because I don't have God.
Although I gather you, since you referenced going for hikes or whatever else you do for spiritual fulfillment or awe and wonder about the world, that is kind of filling in a gap. I don't mean a God gap. I mean, just humans have a need for transcendence, for something bigger than ourselves. We can, love the sunset or beautiful music or whatever. There's something about human psychology that engages us in these kinds of activities. And I don't think it's a replacement for religion or God. I think it's just part of the human condition, of which religion and God is just one, expression of that.
Well, I guess that a lot of animals, and I don't have the percentages, but spend so much of their time locating and consuming and digesting food and looking for shelter and looking for a mate and avoiding predators or seeking prey, that they don't have much time for anything else. But I suppose we have gotten to a state because of our societies and our civilization where we do have, we can accomplish those things and then fill our days with other things. And I think the question is then, what do you fill your days with? And I guess for most people, the answer should be things we enjoy doing. So I'm not sure there's anything.
I forget who said that line. That line: grub first, then philosophy. You have to have your needs met before you can bother with things like literary criticism or music appreciation. Yeah, in one of those. So let's talk about the UAPs, these videos. In a lot of the discussion, there's like, okay, if it's not aliens, then our real concern is that, could be Russian or Chinese assets and they've got some new physics or technology. Now, I'll then bifurcate that into two things. How could they do this without us knowing about it? Let's set that aside for a moment. But one of those Galileo project meetings, Avi made the point, well, we just spent $400 billion on this CERN particle accelerator and no new physics was discovered. So let's not go the no new physics route. Let's think about it some other way. And I agree with that. But, had he said that a century ago, we wouldn't have known about, well, make it more than a century ago, Einstein's new physics over Newtonian mechanics, or, just take any of those quotes from the 1890s, that physics is pretty much done. Everything is just being rounded out to the sixth place after the decimal point and so on. And of course, that was, complete nonsense. So I can't help but thinking, yeah, you're probably right. There's no new physics to be discovered. And, the people friends at Caltech that tell me, no, we pretty much had the standard model is pretty much it. We know about all the quarks and this and that, and there's nothing more down there to drill into to find. Yeah, okay. I'm not a physicist. What do I know? But on the other hand, historically, every time humans say that, then it's like, oh, well, but, a century later, we discovered X, and oh my God, we were so wrong when we said there's no new physics to be discovered. How do you think about that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm, as I said earlier, not a scientist, but I do occasionally dip into, and I think it's I can't remember what the website is, but I occasionally Google major unsolved problems and it comes up like major unsolved problems in physics, major unsolved problems in mathematics, and it does seem to me there's still a lot out there. And I mean, whether it's dark matter, dark energy, string theory, multiverse, I just get the sense there is still a lot that we don't really get. And even some of the basic math problems, which are quite fun, some of them make you think, well, if we haven't figured out some of those mathematical proofs yet, what other things are there that I don't know, we haven't even thought of yet? So I suspect it's going to be like the closer you look, the more granularity you see, and that there is always going to be something. So I think, yeah, I occasionally hear people say it's a repeat of this. There's nothing new left to be discovered. And if history teaches us anything, it's that the very next week there'll be an, oops, we've just found this.
Do you think it's possible that the Chinese or Russians could have developed technologies, say, decades or centuries ahead of our own science and technology development programs? Given the history of science and technology shows it's pretty cumulative, and we all steal from one another and copy one another, and there's really nothing new that one country has that another one doesn't quickly have after that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't recall what the technical term for it is, but as you said, I mean, the essence of it is what you just said, that most technologies are just a logical progression of something that's come before, and that you can't build C without first having built B, and before that, you need to have the principles of A. That said, and I'm just off the top of my head, I'm struggling for it, but I mean, I suppose something like the jet engine, as opposed to standard propeller-driven aircraft, could be seen as a sort of quantum leap breakthrough in aviation technology, aeronautical engineering, and it is, I think, conceivable that every now and then some maverick genius or just because it's the way it turns out, produces something. And it looks like it comes from left field, and it probably doesn't. It probably still builds on existing principles, but it does look very different and very new. So like a coal-fired steamer as opposed to a sailing vessel with the rigging and all of that. And like I say, the jet engine as opposed to the propeller, and then particularly, say, the V2 rocket as opposed to conventional freeform fall bombs. So, yes, I think, to answer your question, it is absolutely possible that Russia, China, anyone could have made some breakthrough that produces what looks like new technologies, new physics. Isn't, of course, because I'm not saying that this would violate any laws of physics, but it would give the United States a shock.
Indeed, yes. Well, one reason I'm skeptical that whatever it is we're looking at with these UAP videos, that they're Russian or Chinese, and then the kind of breathless descriptions of them by believers that, they're going faster than the speed of sound on a sharp left turn that would kill the pilot, so they must have some gravity dampening system or something, and on they go. Well, how would the Russians or Chinese do this without us finding out about it? I mean, it'd be like, you mentioned jet engines. Well, Messerschmitt had jet engines in 1945, and we had Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier in a jet in 1947. I mean, within 2 years. The Manhattan Project, the most secret scientific project ever. We detonated atomic bombs in 1945. The Russians had it and detonated their own bomb in 1949. They stole it. It would be like saying, we have biplanes, or Wright brother biplanes or something, and the Russians have, the equivalent of a B-2 bomber or a stealth bomber, or that we're using the fax machine and the Russians have the internet. How would they do this without us knowing about it? I mean, we would rip them off. We would copy them. We would figure it out within, days, months, weeks, months, maybe years at most. So that's one reason why I'm skeptical that they've made some kind of anti-gravity system, or, what's being described by these videos.
Yeah, I mean, actually, of course, I think I would turn that back and say maybe the answer is, before we even get into Russia and China, we really don't know what the speeds and the maneuvers and the accelerations of these objects are. We've heard, as you put it, breathless descriptions from the believers, and we've heard some less than breathless descriptions from some skeptics too. I don't know what, and the US government, if they know, clearly are not releasing those data for whatever reason. So before we get into it, well, Russia or China wouldn't have this technology. We don't really know what this technology is. And certainly looking at the three best known US Navy UAP videos, I mean, despite people saying, oh, the sudden acceleration, and I've heard estimates of speeds of tens of thousands of miles an hour or whatever it is, but I think the Mick Wests of this world would say, well, those are not the speeds that we're seeing. And if you just go to the soundtrack of the pilots talking to each other on one of those videos, it's not sort of, wow, it just disappeared. It's, whoa, look at that thing. I mean, yeah, it's impressive, but it's not magic impressive. So the first qualifier is we don't really know what speeds these things are capable of. So we don't know whether it's a truly quantum leap development or whether it's just a next step. But my other answer to your point about Russia and China is that, yes, sometimes history shows us that something is developed and then very soon gets copied, but only usually in circumstances where it's fairly obvious what that technology is. So, for example, one can hypothesize, the Manhattan Project is a great example, I think. When the first atomic bomb was dropped in anger, at that point, Stalin said to Beria, okay, we need that. This is the number one strategic priority for the Soviet Union. You have unlimited resources, but we must get the bomb. But had they not dropped the bomb, I don't know what whispers Stalin had heard that the US was developing an atomic weapon, but maybe they wouldn't have gotten the bomb, because maybe it's only when you show your hand in a definitive way. Another example is the breaking of the German codes during the Second World War. And people think that that secret came out in 1945. And of course it didn't, because I think it was late 60s, early 70s before it was revealed that the Enigma machines had been compromised, because some embassies in South American countries, I think, were still using them. And of course we were reading that mail. So secrets can be kept. So I'm not, if these things are Russian or Chinese, until and unless one crashes or is shot down or something, maybe they can operate this new technology and get away with it.
That's a good point. Yeah, I read. Who's the guy that developed the U-2 spy plane? Ben Rich, I think his name was, at Boeing in Burbank, California, right here in LA.
Right.
And this went on for decades, and no one knew that they were doing this right there with hundreds of people sworn to secrecy. So it does kind of counter that my conspiracy skepticism that, people can't really keep secrets. Sometimes they can. Apparently you working for the Ministry of Defense, you had certain amount of security clearance, and you saw things that you probably can't tell us on the show today or ever. So maybe it is possible for people to keep secrets like that.
Sure. I mean, it's one of those things. I was in the Ministry of Defense for 21 years and know a lot of things that are secret that haven't come out on a whole range of subjects, whether it's Iraq or counterterrorism or whatever it is. And of course, people have this thing like, you can't keep a secret. And then, of course, they cite, because they can only cite, secrets which have been revealed, either because they have been declared or leaked or whatever, but they can't and don't cite secrets that have been kept. And secrets are being kept every day in most government agencies. And a lot of this is obviously fairly low-level stuff, but I guarantee there are some pretty big secrets out there that have been kept for decades.
Right. Well, sure. There's going to be more probably about JFK assassination and who knows what else, and we won't know until we know. But so since you mentioned Mick West, he's kind of done the heavy lifting on the video analysis, and ufologists criticize him. What does he know? He's just a video game developer, but that makes me think, well, if a video game developer can deconstruct these videos in such a way to make them relatively explainable, surely someone in the Pentagon must have somebody at that level that already knows all this stuff. Like the simplest one, my favorite example of his debunking is this this particular one here of the little UAP that shoots off. It was in the middle of the two dashed lines, and all of a sudden it shoots off to the left. And by the way, it doubles in size. And it was Mick West that pointed out this little thing right here says zoom, and it goes from 1.0 to 2.0. So in this case, the UAP is not doing anything. It's just the camera zooming in on it, and that makes it, look like it's moving. It's not moving at all. Okay, if a video game developer can look at that and go, no, there's nothing that needs explaining. It's the zoom. Surely someone in the Pentagon must go, these guys out there making these entire television shows about these, incredible new physics that must have been developed. We know it's just a zoom effect on the camera. They have to know this, right? And they're just, why are they not telling us? This disclosure project last June, it really didn't have that much new to say. So I suspect there's a lot more in there that they're just not telling us.
I'm sure that's right. Now, I know what I don't know. So I really, when I was at the Ministry of Defense, there were scientific and technical intelligence people who did all the sort of video and photographic analysis, and I was just a lay person trying to kind of make sense of their technical stuff. So Mick may be right on that aspect of it, and he may well have picked up something that the UFO community missed. I don't think that necessarily means he's right across the board. Certainly what he says should be listened to and evaluated, but I've seen some other people, like, retired military pilots, for example, criticize some of Mick's analysis and say, no, that doesn't stand up because. So I don't know. I think it all needs to be evaluated. But yeah, one thing, going to your point, is absolutely 100%. There will be people in the DoD and in the US intelligence community who do have a much better handle on this. Excuse me. And excuse me a moment.
Yeah, please. Yeah, while you're doing that, just to put a fine point on that, like with the Roswell story, the ufologists say, well, the government lied. They said it was a weather balloon, and then they said it was this and that, and then 1996 they released that report about what really happened at Roswell. This was a high altitude balloon train that was carrying acoustic equipment to try to detect upper atmosphere nuclear explosions by the Soviet Union. So, of course, it was the Cold War. We couldn't tell you what we were doing. So, A, apparently the government does lie to its citizens. No kidding. And B, it's not aliens. It's just Cold War technology, something like that. But I noticed that ufologists didn't say, oh, okay, now we don't have to worry about Roswell. Roswell's explained. No, they just said they're still lying. So it's the question is, what would satisfy a ufologist? They're hiding bodies at Area 51 or the spacecraft at Area 51. Okay, well, let's say they opened the gates and said, all right, you guys get to come in. We're having an open house this weekend. You can see everything we have here. So, of course, we go there and there's nothing there but conventional technology. Well, then the ufologist is just going to say, well, they hid it. They've moved it. That's how we know they have it. And so this gets to this question of negative evidence and testability or falsifiability. What would it take? And by the way, I noticed when George W. Bush, invaded Iraq on the pretense of that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and then the UN inspectors went in there and couldn't find any. And Bush's initial response was, well, they moved them. That's how we know they have them, because we can't find them. And it's like, no. That's what the ufologists say. That's not an argument. It's not a sound argument. And then he later admitted that that was a big mistake.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. And I mean, the whole WMD debate, actually, I think in one sense it is relevant, because there was a very interesting line on that in the UK's, or one of the UK's inquiries about the Gulf War. And it said, obviously we knew as a matter of fact that at one point Saddam had chemical weapons because he had used them. So there was that reasonable start point with the whole WMD thing that they had been there. And then the question is, did they still have them? And one of the senior MI6 officers who was interviewed in the inquiry said something which was quite, I thought, one of these truisms, but what do you do with it in terms of, does Saddam or not have this capability? And he said a bioweapons capability, for example, may exist in the cranium of a handful of Iraqi scientists. And so, in other words, you can maybe destroy a stockpile, but if you possess the knowledge to very quickly then remake that, do you have a capability, even if you don't actually currently have the stockpile, and which is more dangerous, and so I mean, these are difficult philosophical issues, but they are important because we went to war on them, and some people say went to an illegal war on them. So it's not just philosophy; it's important, and lives were and are involved. So, but yeah, it gets to the heart of this question of evidence and proof, and yeah, I mean, you have arms inspections under the treaties, and there are stories of obviously if you can call a snap inspection and go to the other side and say, right, we want to go into this base, but yeah, how do you know that they haven't moved it to the next base or just hidden it very well in the base that you're inspecting? So yeah, the whole concept of proving negatives and where does evidence become proof? I mean, it's difficult, but it's important, and it's central to the UFO debate, but it's central to the Iraq WMD debate and so many other things. By the way, I want to come back on one other point. I was a little bit more enthused about the preliminary assessment of UAP last June than many people in the UFO community were. I actually thought there was some good stuff in that 9 pages. I thought it was interesting that they had mentioned that UAP were detected across multiple platforms, and they specifically mentioned, visual, radar, FLIR, electro-optical, weapon seeker, and so on. I think it was interesting that they mentioned the collection bias problem and clustering, because that's something we need to get to the bottom of. Are there really more sightings around some of these nuclear facilities, for example, or is it just that those areas are more heavily surveilled? I mean, those are all important questions, and whether we're dealing with China or Russia or something else, they are questions that obviously Congress and the DoD and the intelligence community now accept that we do need answers to.
Yeah. One of those quotes in the 60 Minutes piece on the UAPs, correspondent Bill Whitaker was talking to Navy pilot Ryan Graves, who said he had seen UAPs, quote, every day for at least a couple of years. And I remember being struck by that. Like, oh, so this isn't just a one-off thing, and here's our video, grainy video. You're seeing these every day. But then on the other hand, if that's true, given how many, high-definition smartphones there are, 100 million in the United States alone or more, and these are clustered along the coast, so surely there's people out walking their dogs or at the beach or at their homes sitting on the back porch, and there goes another one and another one and another one. Where are all the cell phone videos and photographs? Clear, sharp, not grainy videos and blurry photographs that make it so difficult to see what's going on. This is what always bothers me about this whole subject and related subjects too. The evidence is always kind of murky. You can't quite make out what's going on. And we know from cognitive psychology, that's where the mind fills in the gaps, patternicity and thinking something's there. And like Bigfoot, another one of my areas is, here's a video of a Bigfoot or a photograph of a Bigfoot. And if you squint and kind of use your imagination, you can see right there in the shadows, a kind of a head and an arm. It's like, can't we have like a definitive photograph, not a guy in an ape suit, but I mean, a definitive photograph. And that's what bothers me about that, about these claims about the UAPs. If they're that common, we should have tons of video and photographs, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe they're not that common, or maybe they're not that common in areas where the public might capture them on cell phones and things. And that's one of the reasons why I thought one of the most important revelations in the last couple of years was when former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe threw into that Fox News interview the statement about satellite imagery of UAP. And he said something like he was being dismissive about betting too much on just a handful of videos. And he said, well, it's not just a pilot sighting here or a satellite image over there. And I thought, that's interesting, because nobody asked him about satellite imagery, and he popped it into the conversation. And then
Interesting.
if you look at that interview, he repeated it. He followed up with a second reference to satellite imagery. So I think satellite imagery might be key to a lot of this, and I hope it's something that the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House too, is looking into, because I think satellite imagery could very well be key to a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. Right. If you can pinpoint the date when that video X was shot at this location, 50 miles off the coast of San Diego on this date at 2 p.m, and presumably you could call up the data from satellites or Google Earth or whatever and go, there's what you were looking at right there. We can see what it is now. High resolution, it's a jet or it's a drone or whatever. That would be one way to get at the bottom of this.
Yes, and it's interesting. I don't think, from memory, that when Kirsten Gillibrand wrote her amendment for the new defense bill, I think there was a lot about the need for a science plan on UAP. There was a lot on the need for a multi-agency approach. I'm not sure, even after John Ratcliffe had dropped that bombshell, whether there was reference to satellite imagery. But I do hope it's something that irrespective of the wording in the new National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022, I hope that it's something that Congress will push on, because it is, yeah, absolutely. It should be one of the easiest ways to get, if you'll excuse the pun, resolution on the issue.
Nice. Yes. So let's talk about these shows. You've done a lot of these shows, and since we're talking about Mick West and so forth, they seem to be a little thin on the skeptical perspective. I'd say you're the closest thing they have to a skeptic that appears regularly on these shows, like Ancient Aliens or UFOs Declassified. They're mostly true believers, and you could see from the outset what the premise of the show is. Why don't they have Mick West or myself or Robert Schaefer over at Center for Inquiry, or there's a dozen qualified people that study UFOs for a living that are skeptical, and it seems obvious, well, because they don't want a skeptical perspective. But why not? Why do they think that the American public just has no interest in what the skeptical perspective is? Why not give a balanced show, or say, well, these are what some people say, this is what other people say, kind of a conversation like you and I are having. Do you think they just feel like that's not going to be entertaining enough, and we got to sell a show or fill the airways with enough rich content that too much skeptical analysis is going to make it sound boring? Or, what's your sense of how these shows are produced?
I think it varies, and I've got maybe a different perspective on this, because of course, I've lived in the US for 10 years. Actually, literally 10 years to this day, by the way. So.
Oh my God! Well, congratulations.
Yes, thank you. But when I was in the UK, and I still do some UK TV, but it was much more the case with certainly the BBC, where you did, generally speaking, have to have balance. So on those shows, there often is skeptical input, and I think it works. I'm all for it, because to me, and I've been involved in developing some TV shows, I think if everyone just agrees with everyone else and all the viewers are just nodding and going, yes, absolutely, I'm not sure that's as good as, I say, bring on the skeptics, even if then the believers are shaking their fists at the TV and saying, you evil debunker, you're still working for the government or whatever. So I would be for it. I think it works on multiple levels. I think it's the right thing to do to bring balance, but I also think it's actually entertaining, because you will alternately upset the skeptics and the believers, who are more likely to watch. A range of people are more likely to watch a show with balance than without, and so you'll be on and people will be shaking their fist at you, and then a a true believer will be on, and the skeptics in the audience will be rolling their eyes and saying, "Oh, for goodness sake!" And I think that works. So I think it should happen.
Yeah.
I don't know really why it doesn't. But one thing I would say is that one of the other shows I'm involved with is The Basement Office with Stephen Greenstreet from the New York Post. And if anyone has followed his Twitter feed recently, they will have seen that he has taken a very sharp turn towards more skeptical explanations, much more favoring China and Russia, for example, with the US Navy videos. So season 3 of The Basement Office is coming up, and I think people can expect a few surprises there.
Oh, good. Yeah. One of my favorite video clips that I show to my students in my lecture on the Bermuda Triangle is a BBC production of the Bermuda Triangle. And they open with the disappearance of Flight 19 of these Avenger planes off of Florida. And they present it in a way that's like, oh my God, this is an incredible mystery. How can they possibly explain this? And then they explain it. It's like, oh, it's like, magic tricks revealed. Oh, that's how it's done. To me, I want to know. To me, that's super interesting, rather than here's the mystery and we're just going to leave it at that.
Yes, I want to know too. Of course, very often we're not able to do that with this subject because there isn't a definitive answer. Maybe there are definitive or widely accepted as definitive solutions to some cases, but I think the phenomenon itself, the mystery itself, is still unresolved. And I mean, I guess on one level, if it wasn't, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If it was genuinely case closed either way in the debate. So I think there is still sufficient grey area and things still to be discovered on this. But I think I go back to Congress, and I think it's one of these, examples of the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world he never existed. I think the point is, for too long, we, the atheist brings out that quote, of course. But I think for too long, the authorities, it's not that they haven't looked at UAP, but they haven't looked at it seriously enough. And with the modern technologies that we now have in our hands that we can bring to bear on this mystery. And I mentioned satellites, but I could equally have mentioned the whole discipline of measurement and signature intelligence. So the whole MASINT discipline of looking, for example, at infrared signals through the various cameras and then being able to discern things about what you're looking at, whether it's an engine or a missile or whatever, through the use of that discipline. And now Congress and the DoD and the intelligence community is looking through that particular lens. I think we might be closer than ever to resolution of some of this, or a large chunk of it.
Yeah, I suspect the government knows a lot more than they're telling us, but we won't know until we know. One of the reasons I do what I do for a living is because I
think absolutely 100% agree on that. I mean, just on the 3 best-known Navy videos, again, I mean, self-evidently, the US government has other parts of that footage. I mean, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When we look at those 3 videos, we are just looking at a snapshot. Well, how did we get to that point, and what happened next? We don't have that. We being the public, don't have the data that people, whether they're believers or skeptics, the data that people would like to have on the speeds, on on all of that. We have a few things that the US government has decided in an unclassified video can be left up on the display, but some pieces of the puzzle are clearly missing.
Yeah. In my more cynical moods, I often think there's some government officials somewhere watching all these shows like on Ancient Aliens, dissecting these video footage when they know exactly what's going on. They're going, oh, look what they're saying now. They think it's Russian. Maybe, but we won't know, I guess. Anyway, I was going to say one of the things, the reasons I do what I do for a living is I've always been interested in all these topics. All the way back to college. When I was in college, I read Van Doniken's Chariots of the Gods, and I thought, wow, this is really incredible. What if any of this is true? And then there was a book maybe 2 or 3 years later called Crash Go the Chariots. And an anthropologist, I think it was an anthropologist, kind of deconstructed every one of the claims. Like, here's his claim, here's why it's not true. Here's the claim, here's what we know. Boom, boom, boom. Because it's mostly archaeological stuff, like, the pyramids or the Nazca lines or the Easter Island statues and so on. And I thought that this is way more interesting to have, here's the claim, here's the rebuttal, and line them all up. Like you said, that's super entertaining. I think that's what people want to know. And this is what bothers me about, if I can just rant for a moment about some of these shows, particularly Ancient Alien shows. I want to love that show, but they have no skeptics on there at all. And they'll say something like, well, here's the Easter Island statues, and scientists just have no idea how they carved these things and moved them to the coast. It's like, yeah, scientists do. Why don't you have on Joanne Van Tilburg from UCLA, who has spent 40 years studying Easter Island statues? She goes there every year. She knows every statue by heart. Why don't you have her on the show to explain, here's what we think happened here? And just at least present that. But it's the same people recycled over and over. It makes me wonder about this show. Somebody was telling me it's they just buy the airtime and they just produce whatever they want. There's no fact checkers. There's no editors going, hey, we need to have balance. It's not like a BBC production. So maybe you can give us some insight in that regard.
Well, not really. I mean, I'm a series regular on Ancient Aliens. I always regard it as a sort of fun what if show. But as you probably know, when I do take part, I tend to be in the episodes that look at the more modern aspects of this. So I've never gone to the pyramids or to Stonehenge or to Easter Island and any of that. One time they sent me up a hill in Wales in winter when it was cold and wet and things, but that was to talk about a UFO case. So I can't really speak to that. I mean, I honestly don't even tend to watch my own TV shows, so I don't know. But I think people enjoy it. People like to think what if, and speculate and things. But I'm not an ancient astronaut theorist myself, as I say, and that's not to say that they occasionally don't have me on as almost like an on-screen narrator with some of those episodes where I sort of say, well, some people believe this and some believe that, and I tell the story. But if I was making my own show, I think I would put in the balance, because I do think the dissent is important.
Absolutely. Well, so if you have any influence, tell them to have some more skeptics on. It's like we did a whole issue of Skeptic on Ancient Aliens, because they have, like, much is made about these two figures that appear in crucifixion art in the Middle Ages and early modern period, and they look like spaceships inhabited by little creatures. Well, but any art historian will tell you, well, that's just a common motif that's put in these crucifixion scenes between, paintings done between 1100 and 1400. That's just, and they're angels. That's the sun. These are literally the sun and the moon that are, bracketing the crucifixion scene. And of course, the sun and the moon for the ancients were inhabited things. They were, like kind of sub-gods, that kind of thing. And so why not have an art historian that says, well, that's interesting, but here's what's actually we think is going on in these art forms. That little UFO in the background, those are clouds that the angels sat on, or that that UFO in the back that looks like a hat, it is a hat. That's what this hat image appears over and over, and so on and so forth. It's like, why not make it more interesting? We're having somebody that actually knows what they're talking about when you're looking at a medieval painting. Anyway, I'm kind of ranting now about this, but it bothers me.
No, I get it, and like I say, if I was making a show, I would tell both sides and let the viewers make up their minds.
Yeah. All right. Let's shift to conspiracy theories. Another one of your areas you've spent a lot of time on, as have I. I think it's super interesting, and one reason I think people believe in conspiracy theories is because there are enough true conspiracies. That is, conspiracies do happen. Governments do lie to their people. Governments do cover things up. Corporations do cheat the system to make profits. They do lie, and so forth. So, one of my theories is that it's kind of a constructive conspiracism. It pays to be a little paranoid because we have enough personal experience and historical experience of governments lying and so forth. So how do you think about conspiracy theories along those lines, of why people believe them?
Yeah, and isn't there even an evolutionary argument that I've heard a couple of people put forward that it's evolutionarily advantageous to believe in conspiracy theories, because if you're walking through the bush and you think that you see a leopard, and then you think that looks a little bit like a leopard, maybe I'll back off, then you will survive, and your genes will be passed on. So that kind of looks a bit like it could be a leopard in there, as opposed to, no, it's not a leopard, and then you get leapt on. So I don't know whether that actually is true.
No, that's actually right. That's actually my own idea of what I call patternicity. And you can make two types of errors: type 1 errors and type 2 errors. So you hear the rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator or just the wind? Well, if you assume it's a dangerous predator and it turns out it's just the wind, that's a type 1 error, a false positive, but no harm. But a type 2 error where you think it's just the wind and it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. So a type 2 error is a higher cost error to make. So you're better off just thinking most things are true. Most patterns are real, and we should assume an element of danger there. And then to expand that to conspiracies, that the evolutionary argument from our social aspects is that we're a social primate species, and we have bands and tribes, and that coalesce and work together in a cooperative way against other bands and tribes that are potentially dangerous. So the idea that there's coalitions of people doing things against me personally or against our family, our group, is perfectly rational. That's a totally rational response, because there are dangerous people. There are bad groups. There are, even if the other group doesn't want to be a threat, they kind of have to develop a reputation of being potentially dangerous so that you don't attack them. So you get this kind of security dilemma. I don't want to be, like Russia. We're putting troops here. We don't want to use our troops, but we don't want you to do anything over here in Ukraine. So it's kind of a threat. And so this is the idea of kind of the evolutionary origins of conspiracism. It's that social coalitions of people against other people happens enough that it's rational to assume the worst about other people, that they are really doing something behind the scenes that we should be careful about.
Yes, and I think any student of history, one of my favorite sort of periods of history, I guess, is I don't know, medieval English history. I don't know, from sort of the Norman conquest onwards. And if you read a book on like the Plantagenets, for example, it's just one constant mix of plotting and conspiracies and alliances and betrayals and I think in one sense that's who we are, and factions are plotting secretly to replace other factions. And as you say, I mean, you mentioned tribes. I mean, it goes back, I'm sure, to the dawn of time, that within a tribe, people would be vying for power and thinking, well, if I'm not strong enough to displace the current chief, but if I form an alliance with this other, band of warriors, maybe we could, particularly if we stab him in the back one day, and on almost every level that goes on. So I mean, yeah, conspiracies, collusion, it's who we are, I think, as a species. And then, but what then happens is, in the context of this conversation, I guess this it distills down to a few sort of flagship cases that are almost binary. So now when you think of conspiracy theories, you think like, oh, JFK, the moon landings, the death of Princess Diana, those sorts of things. And those are the sorts of things where I tend to be, fairly skeptical. I think we went to the moon. I tend to focus on the lone gunman theory for JFK, though I don't dispute that a whole lot of people probably did want him dead. But then I look at the indisputable ones. I mean, pedophile priests, for example, that this organization, the Catholic Church, that says endured for nearly 2,000 years, there was and probably still is systemic abuse, which was known about often, and just reading literally again about it today, at the highest level within the organization. And what happened? This was swept under the carpet. People were moved. People were probably paid off and lent on. And it's a real conspiracy. And no one, I think, who's looked at that one would dispute that isn't exactly what happened. So conspiracy theories absolutely can and do happen. I mean, some of them are true, but some are not.
Right. So it's a signal detection problem. How do you know which ones are true and which ones are not? So then you have to do kind of a Bayesian analysis of, what your priors are, and then how those change when new evidence comes in. Like the Jeffrey Epstein, suicide/murder one, I thought, come on, he just killed himself because, he reached the end and there was no hope. But then, then that story came out about the video cameras in the prison that didn't work. I thought, well, that's chance, And then the next story was 2 of the video cameras were broken. I thought, okay, come on, what are the chances of that? That's leaning more and more towards some kind of conspiracy. And then, the probability of that, of a motive. He probably has a little black book of all the powerful, rich politicians and corporate leaders who were on that jet that went to that island. Okay, and then you start spinning out probable stories. And so I posted something on Twitter like, yeah, there might be something to the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theory that he was murdered. And then someone emailed me that worked at that prison that said, oh, those cameras never work. That prison is a dump. They never maintain it. It's a terrible place. And of course, the cameras went out because they never worked. I'm like, oh, okay. So, in each case, you have to kind of look at them one by one. And I think JFK, lone assassin and so on. Go ahead.
Sure. The Epstein one's interesting because then you say, well, a lot of people wanted him dead. Could that have been done? And then you think, well, no, that wouldn't happen. And then you think, but wait, we've just read about another death in prison where it was absolutely, I think, pretty much case closed that that was the Whitey Bulger situation. That he, right, of course, had been an informer for many years, and then he went on the run, maybe with some degree of complicity from the authorities, which is a conspiracy in itself, which may well be true. And then obviously he was deeply involved in and a part of organized crime. A lot of people then realized, wait a minute, this guy had been informing. And obviously, what then happened was that he was savagely beaten to death. So, I mean, that I don't think anyone would dispute was a conspiracy. Some senior figures in organized crime, obviously as a combination of revenge and maybe deterrence in terms of not wanting to encourage future betrayals. Somebody put out the order and said, take this guy out brutally and painfully. And it absolutely happened. So it's interesting sometimes to take something like that, and if somebody's skeptical about the Epstein thing, say, well, wait a minute, what about the Bulger thing?
Mm-hmm. Right. Or even something like the rigged election conspiracy theory. There are rigged elections in the history of democracies, and you have to look no further than, say, 1960s and 70s United States CIA influence of elections in South American elections, where the communist guy is running against the fascist guy, and we want the fascist guy to win because they're friendlier toward American business interests than the communists are, who might nationalize our companies. So we got to help the rebels on the one side, and all that Iran-Contra business. I'm sure that's not the only one. And Christopher Hitchens wrote a book about Kissinger as a war criminal. That he was up to, the CIA was up to all kinds of things that we only found out about later. And now we have WikiLeaks, and it's like, wait, we were doing what? We were monitoring Angela Merkel's cell phone? What? Mr. Transparency President Obama? What? I thought he was going to clear it up and close Gitmo and stop all this, warrantless surveillance. I thought, and we were still doing it. And I'm sure still doing it now. Those are all kinds of conspiracies.
Yeah.
That are conspiracy theories that are true.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've written a primer on conspiracy theories on my website, which kind of articulates my views on some of them. And I mean, I think it just puts a little bit of flesh on the bones of some of the things we've discussed. I mean, I think some of them are true, some of them are not true. I think there is a good side to some conspiracy theories that I think it encourages critical thinking. It encourages us to challenge the official narrative. But there is a dark side to some conspiracy theories too. The anti-Semitism that runs through some of them is clearly one aspect of that. And there are other kind of more dark side aspects too. So I think as with a lot of things, it's conspiracy theories are a mixed bag.
Yeah, the all the different elements that go into it. It's fairly complex. So again, you have to kind of take it one at a time and just see what the evidence is. And in many cases, we just can't know. We just somebody knows, but we don't know, or we won't know yet. One of the best arguments that I make for being chronically frozen and being brought back 500 years from now is like, oh, that's the explanation for that. Oh, I always wondered about that. Or that's what dark matter turned out to be, or consciousness was finally explained in 2220, something like that. Yeah. So, but of course we can't know that. Well, Nick, we've been going for over an hour and a half. Give us your final thoughts on what you think the UAP videos might turn out to be, and also what you're working on next.
Well, I don't know. Those 3 videos could be anything. But I think that given they are operating where they are operating, around these multi-billion-dollar assets, the carriers, and of course, given that we've got a similar situation supposedly happening well, not supposedly, actually happening over the continental United States and elsewhere. Of course, just in the last few days, we've heard about Sweden. And is it drones? Is it Russia? Is it something else? So what I do think is important, I have often said to the UFO community, I think it's very foolish to bet the farm on just those 3 videos, for example, because if Congress turns around later this year and says, you know what, we've looked into this and it turns out that this was a Chinese drone, that some people deep in one of the agencies kind of suspected, and here it is. So then the whole house of cards comes down. So I don't think the UAP mystery stands or falls on those three videos. I mean, I go back to the point. I'm sure there's life out there in the universe. I don't know whether or not we're being visited, but I hope we are, because I think that would be the most interesting and impactful solution to the UAP mystery. I think we're getting close. I know that the whole history of this subject is a sort of tomorrow never comes statement, that we're building up to something and we're closer than we've ever been. But I think that we have now the combination of the will to do it from Congress and elsewhere, and the technology to bring to bear on the problem. So I'm optimistic. I still hope it's aliens. I really do. You know, I don't want people watching this to think that we're too like seamless on this. I really hope it's aliens. But no, I don't know whether it will turn out to be or not. We will see. But UAP, interesting and important, whatever's going on. Conspiracies, some true, some not. What am I doing now? More episodes, you'll be pleased to hear, of Ancient Aliens. Season 3 of The Basement Office with Stephen Greenstreet. I think there'll be something in there to upset everyone. But and a few other new series too. And I just attended, actually I should say this, I just attended a week ago, Hereticon, which was organized by Peter Thiel and the you know, his organization. And that was a sort of group of people talking about everything from the vaccines through to UAP, through to the apocalypse, immortality, human-machine interface. So a lot of people are, I think, now looking at this issue that weren't looking at this issue, or at least weren't looking at it seriously a few years ago. And I mentioned that. So there was Hereticon, there's Avi Loeb at Galileo Project, which we're both involved with. So I think one of the, I'll finish on this. I mean, I think this subject of UAP has for far too long been just regarded as a sort of niche, fringe, conspiracy, sci-fi thing. I think that's changing now, and it's transitioning, and we're seeing people regard it as a defense and national security issue, but we're also seeing the scientific and academic community beginning to take a look, and we're seeing the kind of business community, the tech billionaires, the venture capitalists taking a look too. And I think it's going to be that multidisciplinary, holistic approach that cracks this, if anything does. So exciting times.
Indeed. Well, that's a perfect place to end. Nick Pope, thanks for coming on. You're one of the more interesting people working in this space. I love talking to you, and I love watching you.